let us start this industrial relation uh, concept of your fifth unit. We will discuss about the industrial relation, the concept, and the associated features in this lecture. And we will also look into the various approaches to industrial relations, and we will try to cover up more and more approaches in this session. So let us first start what exactly industrial relation. When we talk about IR, so what are the what is the key idea of industrial relation? So as you can understand that industrial relation means the relationship between management of any organization and the employees of the organization. And in a very simple language, you can say that it is a field of study where you analyze the relationship between management and employees. Now, when you term as management, there is a wide concept of management. When you talk about from corporate relationship, you talk about the board management. But when you talk about industrial relations, it is basically the people who are into a white collar job and employees who are considered to be in blue collar job. And moreover, it is the relationship between the people who manage and the people who are managed. Now look at the interest and objectives of these two broad groups aspect, two broad actors or broad areas or broad group of people that is different in terms of, say for example, one group is managing things and other group is being managed. So their objectives, their mechanism, that may lead to different directions. You can understand that interest of both the groups may be different, and this difference may lead to have some conflict or disputes. So industrial relation also includes this mechanism to settle down the various industrial disputes. Now, the word industrial dispute is very important to understand. Most of the time, what happens when you want to dilute this concept of industrial dispute, make it individual dispute. And if you look at the trade union cases in legislative proceeding, you will find that most of the time it is discussed. It is the approach is to not only look at the industrial dispute, the severity of dispute, or the impact of dispute, or the root cause of the dispute, but industry is always interested to make any industrial dispute as an individual dispute so that the industrial legislation is not into the picture. Because as soon as your dispute is industrial dispute, the IR, it will be an IR problem, industrial relation problem. And whenever it is converted into individual disputes, then it is no more an industrial problem. So you can understand that industrial relation means a study of relationship between management and employees and the mechanism which you or your organization or institution is following to settle down those conflict or disputes. This is very common in saying that what are the three actors of IR, industrial relations. So you can look at that employer, employee, and government. Employer, employee, you can understand in terms of industrial relation. Government, or you can say competent authority, is always a third actor into smoothen the industrial relation. Because employer, see, even the management is considered to some extent in terms of in a definition of employer. And employee means all those people who are being given employment in particular organization. Government, obviously, it is the appropriate government. Appropriate government means sometime your dispute or issue is concerned with the local government, state government. Sometime it is concerned with the central government. So that is why we talk about third actor is appropriate government. Now, what are the objectives of industrial relation that we need to look at in very broader aspect? Obviously, you can understand that the approach of management and the approach of employee, interest of management and the interest of employee, the concluding point of management and employee, they are different. The prioritization of these two bodies, they differ, and since they differ, so the conflict which may arise out of the difference of opinion, approach or interest, that conflict is quite obvious. So difference of opinion, when represented at right platform, it becomes grievance. Before that, it is a conflict. So you must have a grievance handling machinery or procedure inbuilt into your industrial relation domain. So the very first objective comes industrial relation means you have to provide the grievance handling to improve the to reduce the grievances, provide a mechanism. So the first and foremost objective, and that is we talk about the industrial dispute. So when a grievance become dispute and when an individual dispute become industrial dispute, if you look at the Industrial Dispute Act 1947, now it is IR codes 2019, this government has passed an act through parliament called Industrial Relationship Code, IR codes 2019. And with the implementation of this IR codes in 2019, the previous laws, Industrial Dispute Act, that is being replaced by this now. So there has been an upgradation of this act almost after half a century or more than that. Second objective is of IR is mental revolution. Mental revolution means the people must not be a mechanical instrument. They must have their mental application. So one of the objective of industrial relation is that to provide such kind of relationship in industry where the people believe in their innovation, creativity, development. So ultimate objective is to develop, in now modern language you talk about the ecosystem. Safeguarding the employees' rights is also one of the objective of industrial relation. Now you can say that safeguarding employees' right, and that too organization itself thinks about this protection of rights. But yes, it is one of the objective of industrial relations section or IR manager. Contract implementation. Now, what is contract? Basically, mutually agreed terms and conditions of going along with in any organization. Say for example, if management has some contract with employee, say for example contractual employees, look at it in a simple way. So industrial relation has to take into its objective to implement that contract in a smooth and proper manner. And boosting morale of the employees, that is also one of the important point to cover in this industrial relation. IR manager is supposed to look into this morale level, measurement of morale, and then look at how to boost it. Collective bargaining is another objective, which you can say not from management side moreover, but rather from trade union side or employee association side, where management try to give minimum to employees, but employee association or trade union wants maximum from management. So they sit together, develop a mechanism where management and trade union leaders, they sit together and then bargain on their interest, because both the parties do have a separating interest, not overlapping interest. So this collective bargaining is a good mechanism, and you can say it is one of the objective of IR, and obviously leading to performance improvement. When you develop workaholic ecosystem works, high performance work system or performance work system or ecosystem, then your performance of the employees would improve. In a layman language, you can understand, if you are able to handle grievance, if you are able to handle disputes at a very beginning level, you can win this IR game to a great extent, because the moreover the maximum issues are related to grievance, conflict, disputes. And why you want to convert a conflict into grievance or grievance into dispute? Try to resolve it at a very basic level. If there exists any conflict, try to settle down at very early stage. This grievance handling machinery is discussed as a legal or legislative binding to the organizations or industries in this IR code 2019 also, as a separate chapter. And in previous industrial dispute act, this grievance handling machinery was also, there was a provision to handle this grievances, and there were separate mechanism. Say for example, works committee, adjudication process, arbitration process, then legislative process, legal process. So we'll also discuss about this types of processes: arbitration, adjudication, and legislation. But looking at these objectives, if you look at the different approaches which are common and popular or being discussed or used or practiced by the industries to solve their conflict, grievance, dispute. So these are usually called as approaches to IR. Now, if you look at that approaches to IR, you will find that there are many approaches. Some of approaches are very popular or have been popular or were popular, like Marxist approach, like unitary approach, systems approach. Yes, I have tried to add this Gandhian approach, psychological approach into this IR approach. So these are some of the prominent approaches which are either practiced or used by the industries in past, and some of the approaches are still very common in industry for IR. So let us discuss these approaches one by one. If we talk about systems approach, so the approach is almost more than a half century, old, developed by J.P. Dunlop, a researcher of Harvard University. Because if we say that 1958, so you can understand that that was a period, especially if you talk about the global way, then you can uh, you can have the post Second World War, where industry laborers were having their participation in Second World War, and their role was very crucial. And post World War, you can understand that what was the mental state of laborers or employees, and depending on the different governance of different countries, there were different uh, conditions in different countries. Say for example, in India, we were mostly governed, regulated by those acts, those provisions, and those practices. The very important was in after independence practices. Most of the industries practices were either taken from British industries, or influenced by Britishers, or they were not original thought of schools. Those approaches were somehow under pressure, developed under pressure in British period. This systems approach believes that individuals are part of independent social system, independent, whereas we consider employee as a dependent on organization. Behavior, action, and role of individual are shaped by culture of the society mostly. So it simply means that every individual who is in an organization, the behavior is or action or role performed by the individuals, mostly shaped by the culture of the society they have been or they belong to. Three elements of the system approach are input, process, and output. Obviously, when we talk about this, we talk that what kind of culture that a person, an individual, is being given, and obviously the output. Society provides cue to individuals to act in a situation. That means input. And value system of the society influence the process and determine the outcome or response of the individual. So you can understand that uh, individual is an social element, and you have to deal individual as a social element, and this social element is a part of system. Whereas many a time this approach was uh, you know available in industries where individual was considered and considered as an individual system, and this approach helps to understand the system, helps to understand the behavioral outcome, helps to understand the performance response. Unitary approach was little bit different which talks about teamwork, which talks about the common objective, which talks about the individual strategies and mutual efforts. So, for example, this approach talks about to align the individual objectives to the organizational objective, individual strategies to the organizational strategies, so that if Mr. X is making some efforts to achieve individual goal and Mr. Y is doing making some efforts or making some strategy to achieve objective, so make those individual objectives align with the group objective or the organization objective, make them team and make them to make mutual efforts to achieve goal. So unitary approach was a little bit talking about that group efforts, team efforts. And unitary approach talks about that conflicts are non-permanent malformations. That means it is the conflicts are unavoidable, which is result of improper management. That means when you are making teamwork or team to work or group performance, then conflicts cannot be avoided and conflicts can be managed. And if there is a conflict, it means there is some improper management, management of work, management of people, management of task. So looking at these aspects, the unitary approach, team work, that was adapted by some of the industries during that period. The next approach, which is also very much talked about, is pluralist approach, which is also called as the Oxford approach, and it was in proposed in 1970. It talks about that management and trade union are different, and being different, they are subgroup, subset of an organization. And personal experts and IR specialists act as a mediators between management and trade unions. That means personal expert means HR or IR expert. They are mediator. Look at this approach is little bit different. On one side, systems approach or maybe the other approaches talks about that HR and IR specialists are the part of management. But this approach talks about that they're mediator between management and trade union. So this gives you third angle. Unions should get recognition and trade union leaders can perform their duty freely. Union should get recognition means they should be recognized properly, and trade union leaders may be allowed, may be given that ecosystem where they can perform their duty freely without any burden or pressure or different treatment by the management. So pluralist approach says that give equal opportunity when the trade union leaders are working on the job, then treat them as employee, and when the trade union leaders are sitting across the table to bargain, treat them as a trade union leader. Pluralist approach means Oxford approach means simple, treat the role, not the individual. Organization should avail services of external agent to solve disputes if required. This thing is very important because they talk about, this approach talks about that when an external person will come, so you can have a minimum biasness and you can understand from the external agent can understand the dispute from the neutral point of view. So some of the organizations do have the belief in this approach. Then comes about the Marxist approach. Obviously, the very popular approach by Lenin, and just after that, this previous approach, this was also practiced in many industries. You can understand that you know relationship of Lenin. There is a complete Lenin War, which is very popular in history. It emphasizes on social perspective of the organization, means organization as a social entity. Industrial relation depends on the relationship between the workers and owners. Obviously, the concept is same, but here this approach talks about workers first and owners later. And conflict to exercise a higher control over each other exists. That means workers try to control the management or have a better control over the management. At the same time, management also tried to have a better control on employees or workers. Both are trying. In Marxist approach says that both are trying to control each other with a higher approach. And IR are never ending source of conflict under capitalism. Look at now this capitalism enters and change the whole game in Marxist approach. Says that wherever there is a capitalistic approach, then IR industrial relation would always be a source of conflict, because the management would have their capitalistic approach and the workers would have their socialistic approach. And when there are difference in approaches, interest, then conflict would be there. And this type of industrial relation would always be a source of conflict. Survival of the employees without any work is more crucial than survival of the employees without labor. Now, this word is very important. Try to understand work and labor. Labor means shram. If you don't have work, then it is very difficult to survive. Then, if you don't have capability, or if you don't have labor, so there is a difference. Work means activities to be performed, and labor means skills to perform those activities. So what we talk about description and specification, you can understand this from this angle. So this approach was some kind of extreme approach which talks about extreme points. Sociological approach, this talks about human approach, social approach, which says that industry comprises of human beings, and human beings usually involve in conflict due to difference in attitude, skill, interest, personality, and needs. So it is somehow matching with systems approach or some other approaches which talks about, but this sociological approach focuses on human being and talks that there exists conflict due to difference in attitude, skills, interest, personality, needs. And when these human beings are made to move, social mobility, then this conflict do have the difference in the intensity, and that affects output and performance. Say for example, if one person is one employee is transferred from one position to other position. Look at including transfers. So when one person is transferred from one position to other position, may not be promoted, but at the same level, then the output is affected by the difference in attitude, skill, interest, personality, needs, which creates conflict, maybe on previous position or maybe on the next position. Say for example, how many times it happens that students overall performance is affected as soon as the head of department is changed, some new head is being given charge, then this social mobility, this affect the output and performance, maybe in terms of the class performance, maybe in terms of the approach to solve the students issues. And that is why they said that sociological approach talks about human beings into its center point, and difference in attitude, skill, interest is obvious, conflict is obvious, and that conflict increases or decreases with the social mobility. And with this increase and decrease, there is a difference in output. Here comes the Gandhian approach, which you can understand that is purely of your Indian approach. It talks about that Gandhian approach means if you have some grievance, then try to resolve it as soon as possible in the form of peace manner. If you have any dispute, try to look at the magnitude of dispute, and your reaction or response should not be exaggerated, should not be non violent. Gandhi approach believes simply that if you go on a strike, only strike should be when there is a specific grievance or dispute, and that dispute is associated with the mass employees. That means there is an industrial dispute, and the dispute which fails on the table discussion, and there should be complete non-violence in your strike. Your behavior towards your management and the management behavior towards employee should not be a behavior of you know you know owner and servant. It has to be participative. The management is also part of that system, where employee is also part of that system, and both are jointly doing some activity. So no one is on upper hand, no one is on lower hand. The difference in treatment because of the grade, because of the greed, because of the caste, because of the any factor should not be there in industry. The ones who are not involved in strikes should not be tormented. It happens that if someone is on a strike, or some group of employees are in a strike, they try to target those people who are not on. It is peaceful. It has to be non-violence. And if you are targeting someone, it is also kind of behavioral violence. If you make sarcastic comments, it is basically a kind of violence. So Gandhian approach is in industries where this comes about. They talk that Gandhian approach talks about that you have to get your work done. Now you have to get your work done through peace approach. non-violence approach, considering everybody as a human being, irrespective of management and employees. So, this approach, I am trying to put it an angle of, because Gandhi had given his opinion about the strike. He participated in a strike. He was involved with the trade unions in early age, and he had a very clear cut view on this strike and the approach of the strike or approach of the dispute settlement. Apart from this, psychological approach is also very common in IR. Psychological approach talks about that, you know, different in perception causes the difference in, you know, attitude, different in behavior, different in mindset, difference in perception. And this behavior, mindset, and perception under this approach conducted by the researcher was studied by using thematic application test, where a kind of experiment was conducted to understand the psychological approach to IR, and to what extent the psychological approach affects industrial relations. The two groups were asked for a picture of mid-age uh, you know man, without indicating that the title, the pose, the head, and asked about certain questions about the attributes. One group talked about that it is basically management person. Other group talked about that it is trade union leader. And the specific attributes of manager and trade union leader was studied with respect to that picture shown to all the employees. And it was found that the employees were having different in perception. Some with the attributes, they were understanding that it is actually manager. Some were considering as a employee trade union leader. So there was a perceptual difference, and this perceptual difference can change behavior of their group. Say for example, if trade union understand by seeing a person coming to them that they are that person is manager, so their attitude, mindset will change. If they consider that person is trade union leader, so their attitude and mindset would change, which earlier approaches like Gandhian approach talks about that your mindset, your perception, your behavior, considering that manager is there or employee is there, should not change. So psychological approach, they talk that industrial relation, industrial dispute, industrial conflict, industrial grievances are moreover an outbound result of this behavior, mindset, and perception. So if you study the behavior, mindset, and perception of management as well as employees, so you can have a better dealing with employees, you can have a better IR ecosystem, and you can you know uh, learn about the interest groups in industry, and that helps in solving most of the problems. So in next lecture, this human relation approach, which is also a very common approach we discuss in management also, this is a bit similar to your sociological approach, although discussed by or proposed by Keith Davis. Talks about that you need to learn about the relations, human relations in organization or industry. Human relation means, you know, earlier, I take one example to make you understand this. Earlier, there was a, internal recruitment procedure, and there is a still internal recruitment procedure. Some of the companies, they offer your spouse an alternate job or employment, and it is studied that offering job to spouse has been very successful phenomena in retaining employees, in maintaining decorum or ecosystem or work system. Now you can say that since the relationship between employee and spouse is unconditional, with the you can say pre-existing conflicts which cannot have a space for newer conflicts, or you can say that better understanding, and also that because of human relations, it is not easy to change job, or to create dispute, or to create conflict, or to perceive conflict. So Keith Davis believes that if you have human relation approach, consider human being is a social animal, and the relations between those people, human, they are more than the relations with the organization. And to handle with that, you have to adapt the human relation approach. You have to use, you have to follow human relation approach. Some critics have also observed that human relation approach is basically an emotional approach or exploitation of the human relations for the corporate benefit or industry benefit. But then otherwise, the purpose of industrial relation is to minimize dispute, minimize grievances, minimize conflicts, solve the problems as and when at a very early stage. So then when you talk about relations, obviously that would include your emotional relations also. And to some extent, it is not wrong to say that emotional relations are also, or are contributing to human relation approach. So for much detail, you can have a reference section